Good evening, everybody. My name is Ute Fendler. I'm a member of the cluster, and it's my pleasure to welcome you tonight for a very special getting together with two special guests. I'm very honored that they accepted our invitation to be here tonight. So there's Professor Alexie Tcheuyap, and there's the filmmaker Jean-Pierre Bekolo. I will say a little bit more about the two persons who will be discussing tonight. Professor Alexie Tcheuyap is professor at the University of Toronto. He's a specialist in African Francophone literatures and film, with a focus on West Africa and Cameroon mainly. But he has widely published on literatures, on violence, on Boko Haram, on intertextuality, so very, 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 very widely published. So I'm very happy that he made it here from Toronto just for 2 days to be with us tonight. So welcome, Professor Tcheuyap. And Professor Tcheuyap will also have a conversation with Jean-Pierre Bekolo, and I'm also very happy, we are all very honored and happy that he also made it to Bayreuth. He has been here several times. He's, I would say, something like the enfant terrible du cinéma francophone, but also at the same time the avant-garde filmmaker, one of those ones who always sets the pace and also new themes and also new aesthetic categories, I would say. So from his very first film, Quartier Mozart in the 90s, to his, I don't know where to start, I guess you will talk about this, but he kind of invented, let's say, genres that haven't been there in African cinema on the continent, with the first science fiction, with the first queer film, but then also a very political film about the political situation in Cameroon with the president, up to one of his more recent films about the Afro-descendant population in Colombia. So the EOCC is a very large range of films and themes, not to forget the documentaries also, with a lot of interviews with intellectuals and very hot topics on the continent. Also, he's a fellow at the University of Bayreuth, so he will stay with us for a couple of months till the end of July. And his project deals now with the concept of healing cinema, and I think they will discuss also this new concept that he will work on in Bayreuth, and you might have more chances and possibilities to exchange with him about this healing cinema concept. So, with no further ado, I would like to hand over to Jean-Pierre Bekolo, but first a warm welcome also to Jean-Pierre Bekolo. So the floor is yours, and I hand over to Jean-Pierre Bekolo. Thank you very much.
I have my mic.
Your mic, yeah, of course, sorry.
Okay.
Maybe two is better.
Okay, thank you. Good evening. So it's a pleasure to be here. And thank you, Ute, and I think it's a good start, you know, because when I was told that I have to make a discussion with Alexie, I said, what kind of theme, what kind of angle should we tackle, or should I at least? So I just told him the theme because he didn't know what I was planning to do. So the whole idea is actually to question our ability to change the continent as filmmaker, as intellectual, as scholar. I usually say that when somebody doesn't understand a book, he thinks he's not smart enough. But when he doesn't understand a film, he thinks the filmmaker is not smart enough. So it's really in balance, you know. Cinema is not made for people who are smart anyway. It's always for those who are not able to kind of do something very, I would say, who are not very, very educated. In Cameroon most of the time, around cinemas back in the days, that's where all the gangsters were actually, it was like the base of the gangsters. So, but the serious question actually is how is cinema, because that's what I can talk about, able to help with the transformation of our societies, which the question I throw also to the intellectuals. You know, since you guys have been going to school, what has changed, in Africa. So I would really start with some images, and then I'll talk through these images, and then hopefully we'll be able to continue, okay? So.
To add to this time period, because
okay.
now that we know, so you imagined your future of 2025 and 2005. So now we are 15 years later, and we are nearly at to 25. And I think so. I don't know how it is right now.
Basically, I was asked to teach a class about what they call semiotics. Okay, so if you can see something, just watch like 15 minutes, then I come back.
It felt more like an experimental movie.
Okay.
I really liked how the story, when we already, or in the beginning, we didn't know where the women are going.
Okay, so that's enough. Okay, the reason why I started with Zoom is because here we spend all our lives studying how to work with images, image language, and then comes COVID, and then confinement, and the only thing we do with this wonderful medium is to show our ugly faces. So what is the whole point of just showing the face and talking while we study all the language of cinema? We learn how to be able to create a storyline, a narration, and dramatic structure, whatever we studied. And so I thought maybe we should start thinking about the medium we use and to kind of invade them, and to kind of get into Zoom, for example, and turn it into a film medium. So I think, I don't know who is very excited about just watching people's faces, I think cinema has enough elements to kind of help us to kind of do better, okay? So this is the theme, how to become a therapeutic intellectual, I don't know if I can explain more about it or develop, but therapeutic really here came from, obviously, what I was stating before, the fact that the whole culture of intellectual actually came from somewhere, because Africa is an invention, as we just read. We didn't, the whole colonizing system came with so many things, including the whole idea of being an intellectual. But I'll start with one of the subjects that is a little bit trendy. It was about the art objects being sent back to Africa. I don't know how to translate le réensorcellement.
Moi, je disais que nos arrière-grands-parents nous racontaient cette histoire surtout Martin Paul Samba. Il nous la racontait, des fois on se retrouvait, et surtout le 8 août comme ça là, on nous rassemblait tous pendant les vacances, on nous racontait comment était la vie de Samba, qui était Samba, et qu'on devait suivre son parcours.
Il faut faire très attention, parce que ces œuvres qui n'ont rien à voir avec le discours avec lesquels ils sont présentés ici, avec lesquels ils sont présentés en Occident, maintenant, quand on les ramène comme ça, ce ne sont pas des œuvres africaines, ce sont des œuvres occidentales parce qu'elles sont enveloppées par un discours occidental. Elles ont une valeur marchande, etc. Donc, la poupée à chanson, on en parlait, l'une des plus chères. Donc, hélas, connaissant mes frères ici au Cameroun, ayant confiance en leurs bêtises, je suis certain qu'ils exposeront ces œuvres exactement comme c'est attendu. Ces œuvres ont beau être au musée de l'Homme ou bien ici à Yaoundé au musée national, ce seront toutes des œuvres occidentales.
Il faut réveiller nos chefs traditionnels
il faut réveiller nos docteurs de la tradition pour qu'ils lâchent du lest, qu'ils enseignent, qu'ils enlèvent le sceau du secret dont ils entourent certains pans de leur existence, y compris au niveau de l'art. Et ils peuvent ainsi développer la culture pour la jeune génération. Sinon, pour ces jeunes générations, l'art n'aura de signification que pour quelques rois. Pour quelques rois. Or, il faut que l'art joue son rôle pour toute la population.
Comment la musique disparaît. Et donc mon souhait est que tout ce travail, toute cette musique retrouvée puisse avoir une maison, puisse trouver un endroit où on la retrouve toujours, pour qu'elle puisse servir de base à la recherche au Cameroun, mais aussi tout simplement à l'écoute pour tous ceux qui voudraient écouter une musique qu'ils n'ont pas écoutée.
So this is a film that I made just mainly talking heads about this idea of returning African objects that have been in Europe that was stolen and whatever. So and it's a very interesting for me topic because it's actually showing a lot about this identity. You know, this is something that belonged to Africa, went to Europe maybe by force or stolen. Now it's coming back and it becomes an issue. So just to stand up, say who are we? Who is this invented Africa, which is a concept from Professor Mudimbe. So the whole idea of being in that kind of territory, clearly, and with the concept we need to manipulate and how to kind of be this agent of transformation is actually, for me, really tricky. So I'll go to the next, hopefully.
Et aussi, tout simplement,
les riches ont fait partie.
The people who are talking, Joachim, the last one, is he passed away, unfortunately. He collected Cameroon music since 1940s and created kind of music archive for Cameroonians. And obviously, nobody was interested, you know, and he passed away, and I think his archives are kind of there, you know. And he was telling me how he wished that at least this archive will be, you know, like used for something. But I remember we tried everything to kind of interest Cameroon government. Nobody really was interested. And then before, I guess, I don't know if you understand French, but they were talking, the different people were talking about, one was talking about the secret, how still tradition is so secret that we don't even know how people will be able to learn as it's from all these artifacts that are gone with all these secret societies. And the first one was at the T-shirt Berlin. He was actually saying the problem with all these is the discourse. You know, he's sure that once the object are gone, and having now kind of Western discourse, they'll come back to Cameroon with the Western discourse. So for him, they're not African objects anymore. And unless we find another discourse to be able to kind of present them. So this is the end of Joachim.
De garder cette musique. Leur musique, à chaque fois qu'on leur parle, ils disent que ça a disparu, les amis sont revenus, ils sont pris, ils ne vont pas ramener, etc.
Okay. Now we're getting to the real topic. So obviously, this is a film I made called The President that was banned in Cameroon, but it was a film mainly showing one of the problems we have, long-lasting regime, whatever you can imagine.
Les mouches, la pourriture aussi. La royauté attire du monde, mais la chute aussi. Les riches ont fait partie, femmes et enfants. Dans le village, il ne restait que les familles des pauvres gens. Victimes innocentes des manigances, si proches d'un futur teinté de violence. Les ennemis anciens amis du roi attendent. Ils attendent patiemment que le naturel le ponde, afin que coule le le son de la vengeance. Soigner les plaies ouvertes par tant d'années d'allégeance. Le roi va mourir, le village le sait. À l'après lui, même le roi n'y avait pas pensé. Le chapeau du chef flotte dans l'air. Les têtes se cognent pour savoir qui le portera. Que la paix aille mourir à la guerre, pourvu qu'il y ait une tête qui soit couronnée roi. Le chapeau du chef flotte dans l'air. Les têtes se cognent pour savoir qui le portera. Que la paix aille mourir à la guerre, pourvu qu'il y ait une tête qui soit couronnée roi.
Aux dernières nouvelles, c'est-à-dire à l'heure où je vous parle, le président serait allé chez un rappeur nommé Valsero, le général Valsero. Il semblerait, n'est-ce pas, que le président lui aurait proposé de le remplacer au poste de président de la République.
Si vous voulez mon avis, Monsieur le Président, je pense que être chef d'État, c'est avant tout une question de responsabilité. Le pouvoir nous donne des obligations.
Yeah. So, as I was saying, we live in societies we would like to transform, mainly, I guess, all over the world, but I think in Africa it's more even in the feeling of that we need to change the society. We need to make sure at least the minimum, we don't even talk about more, but the minimum is done. So in obviously our practice as filmmakers and intellectuals, I think a lot of people are addressing these questions, and it's one of the things for me that sometimes make what we do sound irrelevant or feeling that maybe there's something else that needs to be done. Obviously now the question is, how is knowledge helping? Because we suppose that knowledge is actually a kind of tool, or I guess otherwise universities wouldn't be that important. So how is knowledge, really connecting with that need of transformation? Obviously, I can only look at it as a filmmaker, on a filmmaker's perspective. There's an interview here I did with Mudimbe. Mudimbe is Congolese philosopher or whatever. He's been teaching at Duke for many years. He worked on 30 languages, and we made a film of 4 hours. And obviously, he has a very clear idea about all these questions. Now, I hope...
Qui produit la connaissance, mettant de côté une inspiration divine et prenant un système fermé, on dirait il y a deux principaux types d'intellectuels. Il y a d'abord Pierre Bourdieu reprend donc les catégories, reprenait les catégories médiévales qui utilisent deux termes latins, les auctores et auctor, qu'on peut traduire par le penseur et prophétique. Et on oppose alors celui-là au lecteur. Et dans la tradition occidentale, bon, c'est une fonction sacerdotale. Que j'explique. Nous sommes en train d'opposer les deux types d'intellectuels. D'une part, les prophètes. Les prophètes, ce sont des intellectuels qui, avec intervention divine ou pas intervention divine, simplement le prophète connaît ce qui se passe, voit ce qui se passe. Karl Marx, oui, voit ce qui se passe. Et les problèmes que ça pose, que le modèle économique capitaliste impose. Et Freud, qui est médecin, il voit les problèmes que certaines personnes ont. Et ces gens, à partir donc de leur compréhension de ce qui fonctionne mal dans l'économie politique ou dans le comportement des individus, explorent des possibilités de résoudre ces problèmes. Et en faisant cela, leur contribution implique des restructurations dans la manière de comprendre ce qui ne va pas chez l'individu ou dans la société.
No. Yes, I think this one is a big chapter because film is 4 hours, but very clearly he was able to help to go back to understand what are the different type of intellectuals, the sacerdotal, the one he calls, he comes from church, you know, that's where the tradition of preaching on Sunday, it's kind of a whole ritual that been taught in seminaries. So now they kind of this model is the one that became the university one. And then he talks about the prophetic one, which is he explained very well. So now the question was obviously looking at, again, the inability or our need or envy to be able to transform our society, obviously to kind of think how knowledge, you know, affect all that. So I kind of decided to look at the African intellectuals. Obviously, the model of Senghor is very interesting. I guess he's the one in Francophone area, at least, that really defined what an intellectual is supposed to be. What is very interesting is that he became very quickly a political figure. At the same time, he was a poet, founder of the Negritude. So I think, I don't think he taught at university, but he was really the model of the transforming intellectual, as he was, I think, first minister in one of the government in France, and then mayor of Thiès before he became president. And he was independent also at the same time. So Senghor has been, you know, really like this model of the intellectual and the transforming one. You know, here I was trying to say, I want to show maybe a clip of one of the film I made, because the whole connection with Freud, with Senghor and the French language, you know, sorry, I'm lost. With the French language is really important. I made a film called Miraculous Weapons, based on Aimé Césaire's text, I mean the title only, which is Les Armes Miraculeuses. And that film is actually the story of a prisoner in love with French language, hoping that, a prisoner on death row, hoping that French language might save him from death. That's all, I don't know.
Okay.
So,
permission for visits of a maximum of 4 hours may be obtained through the warden for those visits.
Oblige those.
My name is Stéphanie Foucault.
I'm your French teacher.
I will repeat it in French, okay?
Je m'appelle Stéphanie Foucault. Je suis votre prof de français. I'm a law student. I've decided to give some French classes in order to get closer to the carceral system. You see? So, je vais vous apprendre la langue de la Révolution.
Why is it so important to you that French is the language of French Revolution? Do you want to bring revolution here?
No. But, you know...
It's just because words are important, you know. We don't have to talk with nothing. It's useless. Useless, you see.
Si nous disons les choses pour ne rien dire, c'est du bavardage, non? You understand what I mean? Yeah?
Yes.
You understand? Yes.
Yes.
So, les mots
sont des fenêtres. Fenêtres ouvertes sur le monde. You see? So, you. Who are you?
In our world, I am a nigger, a legal slave. I am a victim of the capitalistic structure of our societies. My name is Okoroko.
Jamal Okoroko. I am a man who dreams of a society without privileges, where pigmentation of skin would be nothing but a simple accident.
I am a man who is conscious that he is a victim of oppression because of his so-called race. I would like to force, to oblige those who tried in vain
to reduce me to a status of an animal for centuries just because of the color of my skin. I would like to oblige, to force them
to see me, to consider me, to recognize me
as a human.
I am a racist, anti-racist. La vie.
Okay, so this is a little bit long, but yeah, but further down, yes, he's actually explaining how the French language is Sartre. He heard about Sartre, and then that's why he decided to study French, because he heard that some people think they can fight oppression through the French language. That was his definition of negritude. So that's for that one. I'm lost now. So yeah, let's continue with cinema. Yes, the intellectual. Yeah, so that was for the French intellectual. Yeah, that's the clip we saw just now. Yeah, the syncretic intellectual, I love this one. I don't know if you heard about people who are at the same time chief professor, doctor, traditional, whatever, and poet. So we had this picture you saw before, is the case. He's a minister in Cameroon, but he's all these things at the same time. He's minister, doctor, professor, traditional chief, and everything. So the question being really how all this work together, why the need of all this, in transformation of society. Obviously, the preaching is what we heard before by Mudimbe, the whole idea of just hoping that by talking, by telling people things, obviously the society will change. Yeah? And now we're reaching also the whole education system that obviously was like a kind of Western model, like brought to Africa, and with people obviously learning, Western model of education, obviously, which was because of invention. And also, and I like this one too, the whole idea of solutions. Thabo Mbeki, when he was president and there was this kind of HIV crisis, he said we need African solutions. Obviously, a lot of people died, but waiting for the African solution that didn't come. But the whole concept of that there are so many problems in Africa, but most of the solutions are not African. And maybe that's also why the transformation is kind of difficult. Obviously, yeah, these are cases of non-intellectual transformation, even if you can consider that there were many revolutionary that were kind of intellectual. One of my favorites is Amilcar Cabral. This picture is interesting because you have Sankara and Compaore who will kill him at the back, laughing. So, yeah, these are people who decide to solve some problems in their way, maybe making a coup on the continent. So this 1966 Congress of Black Writers and Artists at the Sorbonne was really kind of a big change. Just look at the fact that it was before independence. Ghana will be independent 1 year later, the first country. Then all these people meet, obviously for change, knowing that they're intellectuals, knowing that they're in Paris, but thinking that they can change the continent, just being writers, artists, and getting together. So for me, it's kind of inspiring. One of the figures that is interesting, and we'll talk about him later, because he's also, for me, the first therapeutic intellectual, is Frantz Fanon. Frantz Fanon comes to the Congress in September 56. Then he resigned from his position as chief of this medicine unit in Alger 2 months later in November, and he joins in February the army, the FLN, to start fighting. He gave up also his French nationality, or just before. So that meeting, that gathering, obviously, this is how Senghor defines it, because this was after the Bandung, the non-aligned conference, where black people were able to kind of affirm their own identity, Frantz Fanon quote also is very important, because he's kind of already giving the tone, the body to body of the nature with its culture, racism element of the systematic oppression of the destruction of cultural values and the devaluation of, sorry, it was fast. So that's why I put him there. But they were also very interesting figures in that kind of way as intellectual, though there's Sartre, obviously, and with the Che Guevara and Simone de Beauvoir. So actually, it was interesting to see also how they perceive all this. How do you transform society as an intellectual? Why would they go to see Che Guevara? And now this is Fanon during the war, when he was now really ready to fight. Here, now we go back to, which is actually like a funny connection with Fanon's book, Peau Noire, Masque Blanc. So I think this is now where cinema comes in. We wonder if we can't identify some problem in the society and maybe see if cinema cannot fix them. And this is a case that happened in Cameroon, where this businesswoman create kind of drink that will make you bleach, like you become white, light skin, just by drinking whatever. So it created a stir, and then obviously it goes back to the shame, be ashamed of your own skin color, which is still, obviously a big issue, and that somehow can be addressed, with the elements cinema provides, meaning, identification, representation, self, whatever. So I think for me it was important that to see in 2022 you have this kind of problem, and maybe cinema has kind of therapy, for it. Fake cinema, obviously, when COVID hit, we were hoping that Will Smith would come and hit like he hit the aliens, So we thought he would hit COVID. So just to say how much American cinema has made us think that America can do everything, and then Will Smith came back hitting, instead of hitting COVID, he was hitting, what is his name? Chris Rock. So just to see how kind of vain is cinema, Then the idea that let's watch this first, and it's a clip of my film Les Saignantes. Yeah, this one mainly is the feeling when you watch a kung fu movie that you're strong. I don't know why. I don't know what kind of triggers something in us that make us feel that because we watch a kung fu movie, we can fight. So for me, it's very important because it helps define what is cinema. Why do we feel that you didn't get any training? You just watch somebody fighting, but you feel like you're ready to fight. So for me, question the medium we're dealing with, you know, and what is it? What is it really? So many people try to define it, obviously. There are a few definitions I like a lot. Christian Metz, I took some of his class on semiotics. For him, it's like a mirror. It's like the mirror more faithful than the actual mirror, you know, so the way he defines it. Then Godard, that's Tarkovsky, you know, that's long. But I like when he says that that we gave up too quickly on immortality. For him, he sees actually that the responsibility of the filmmaker is really like a penal, like you can actually be jailed for making a film a certain way. So which gives it very important like reality. With Godard, I like the radiology dimension. It's like, cinema is like radiologist. So we are actually, and for me, I define myself like this, like just to be able to show the problems. Because when you do an X-ray or a scanner, is to show the problem. But the one who does the radio, the X-ray, is not the one who fixes the disease. You go back to the doctor, another one who will actually give the treatment. So this is a good diagnostic tool. He's not a filmmaker, just Anna, but I just like the fact that he says that any series of art is a critical kind of act, you know, really. So I think somehow I like that, you know, that when if it's not critical, it's not really serious. Henri Laborie is, I think, he was a biologist too, but he it's not about the imagining man, you know, because he's above all the capacity to escape and to the imaginary world that creates a new world in which he can finally late. Okay, if cinema itself became like a disease, you know, because somehow when you go to Hollywood today, you can go, they detest movies. They put you all like in the doctor, like look at this very well. You know, you can see the heartbeat for this movie, and then you can tell this is good because you can cut this part because it's too low. So they have all these like hospital kind of to make sure that film is success. So how they kind of connect it to our biology. Obviously, we are kind of a victim of all this. So there's also all this useless cinema. I mean, I call it red carpet cinema. You know, obviously, we don't wonder what red carpet has to do with cinema. So it's now very popular in Nigerian films, in Cameroon. They mix all this idea of celebrity being. While I like this case because even if it's unfortunate, that in Nigeria they were talking about making 1,000 movies per year, but that year they didn't see any movie, couldn't see Boko Haram coming. So how can you make 1,000 movies and not one can show something that is happening next door? So I felt that somehow cinema becomes a kind of distraction. Actually in French they say distraction, but something that distracts you from a danger that might actually, I think COVID was the same. Nobody saw COVID coming, or maybe somebody did, I don't know. So I like this one also because this film, Good Will Hunting, this scene with Matt Damon and Robin Williams.
It's not your fault. Don't fuck with me, all right? Don't fuck with me, Sean, not you. It's not your fault.
So this is a scene where actually this guy is critical about society, and he's able to kind of show how useless it is to go to school, to get a job and everything. But then the whole story turns at some point where they ask him what he wants, the psychologist, and then starting making a problem he described as general, as collective, individual, which actually is a problem because we have like collective disease, collective problems as society, but you don't have a hospital or psychiatric for collective. Everybody goes and sees psychiatrists alone. So it's really interesting how, like when you have repression, I'm just giving an example of in France right now where Macron is hitting people very hard because they're demonstrating, but it's a collective, let's say, repression. And then when you go back and you have trauma, you're alone, you know, with your psychiatrist. Like if the problem was an individual problem. So obviously the idea here, and maybe we'll just stop very quickly now, because is the idea of how do you, with cinema, think about brain and reprogramming or whatever. So I like this film also a lot, Memento, Christopher Nolan's first film, I think. It's somehow a film that is a lot about that, really. You know, most of the time, film use emotions. This is the first film, I think, that used memory to connect with the audience. Where The guy has a condition, and that's what makes him not be able to remember things. But you as an audience, you kind of follow the whole thing through memory, and the whole idea that you have a friend, you don't remember him just like the next day. You don't remember that you had a party last night, everything. So, which is very scary as a point. So I thought films that explore limits like this on what we are and how we can relate, for me are really, really important.
Even if you don't want to.
I think I'm running out of time. So. Yeah, so there are so many things. Ebussi was a Cameroon philosopher. He wrote many interesting books, and the main one is The Crisis of Muntu, meaning that he's actually showing the crisis we are as Africans contemporary between the kind of what we're supposed to do, what we're being told to do, because we've been told so many things as colonized, as Africans, as whatever. So I just think he's explaining how we are kind of in limbo. But his first book was about the dialogue and the myth. So where it was actually his thesis of PhD. But he was talking a lot about how dialogue is more real than all this thing we do, which is like writing or even making films. Why we love Black Panthers and all this. This is for kids mainly, but kids love these superheroes because obviously they're small in a world of big people. So they kind of, they call it the rehabilitating hero. When you had a trauma, you always want somebody to help you kind of go further and to be able to pass your trauma. So, and that's, say most of us will have or have some traumas, and sometimes we need a rehabilitating heroes. Some dictators use that too. Okay. I think it's almost the end. Yeah, Scarface, because we like bad guys. Behavior. Behavior is very important. Obviously, yes, cinema is a lot about action, but not the kind of action we see. We think, took this image because it's unfortunate, but the idea that cinema is a call for action somehow. So we have to do something. I always feel like watching a movie, going back home and sleep is kind of strange. Yes. Yeah, obviously, as you can imagine, there are many movies that are in malls while you had...
When I was 2 months old pregnant, he left the house. Then he told me he was going somewhere. Fortunately, he went and he never came back. That he was burnt by the military. The great massacre that happened in Ghana at the Port South. He was burnt there. He was one of the victims.
Okay, so I just stopped there. Now, this one is really kind of the whole healing cinema business. The idea that obviously cinema shouldn't be in malls. Maybe we should find other places. But this specific piece is a kind of an exhibition where we actually take stories, with people with kind of trauma. And then the audience are people also who are kind of sick. And then the jury is kind of the specialist, the psychiatrist. So we are kind of playing how cinema could maybe be between the audience that are people with a problem and the jury that are supposed to help, and then the film that are also supposed to be like, I don't know, made in a way that it should actually help. So I'll stop there for now. I think I was too long.
Well, I don't know. Where do I start after Bekolo, after Jean-Pierre? This is very challenging. Well, thanks a lot for a wonderful presentation. Thanks for sharing your thoughts with us about society, about Africa, about cinema, about art in general. Just take 1 or 2 items which you share, 1 or 2 thoughts, maybe more eventually when we are able to exchange. The first thing is, liked very much the excerpt from Mudimbe about the intellectuals. I realize in the end that your talk is focusing, has this kind of perceptible obsession with intellectuals. And while I'm very happy that you were able to bring Mudimbe's definition of his 2 categories of intellectuals that are related to medieval concepts, medieval models, I also have some trouble with that. for a few reasons. The first is that I find it a little intriguing that Mudimbe would draw from, there's nothing wrong with that, but I would not only draw from medieval church model, which is understandable because of his personal trajectory, but also that in many ways he seems to not disqualify, but at the very minimum forget or ignore other possible categories. Because from what I understood from his reading, from quoting on Bourdieu, all these intellectuals are supposedly learned people, people who've been to school, people who are educated in the Western world, and people who have eventually degrees. But as you probably know, degrees don't make us intellectuals. That's first. And second, as you probably know as well, you've got many degree holders who are far beyond mediocre, if not horrible intellectuals. Not only because there's no value to what they actually bring to society, but also because of the kind of counter value that they tend to promote. I would just take a few examples of intellectuals who, I hope you agree with me, who may not fall within the category of Mudimbe because they are not learned, but also there are people who have brought major change in the life of their compatriots. You know pretty well that, I mean, they are educated. Somebody like Chinua Achebe, Mongobeti, Ngugi, these are people who were able, because of their art, to foresee things that happened to their countries a long time ago. As a matter of fact, when we read Achebe's novel, everything that happened in Nigeria were actually foreseen in his books. That's one example. The second example, which I hope, I mean, you probably know this more than anybody, but Fela Anikulapo Kuti, who is, in my view, one of the best spirits that was ever produced by Africa, is, in my view, I think, one of the finest intellectuals that we could ever think about, because he's among the first to have clearly stated that coup d'etat were actually very bad things for the continent. Well, except for Ghana. Thank you, J.D. Rawlings. But Fela was, I mean, the way he challenged the military rulers in Nigeria, the way he was able to expose the hideous face of his society through his songs. One of it is Shakara, but also things like, look at, just take Suffering and Smiling. I mean, isn't it amazing that over 30 years ago, he was able to capture the nature by which many African population, many African people are able to comfortably suffer while smiling the first time in the same time. So, I mean, this is something that Fela saw many centuries, I mean not centuries, many decades ago, and he put it really forward there. I will take one or two other examples. I mean, what do we do with somebody like Tiken Jah Fakoly? What do we do with yourself? What do we do with Mongobeti? What do we do with Fabien Ebusi Bulaga? What do we do with somebody like Pius Njawe, for example? They never wrote books, but they seem to have had a very important impact in the life of their countries. I will end with one other aspect, which I don't think we've actually theorized a lot. But this is based on my experience as a child and as a grandchild. I will tell you what I think about it. You know, I was educated by my mother and my grandmother. And it's interesting, and I'm pretty sure you will share this with me. You see, these women, especially my grandmother and my mother, you would see people come from far away to come and seek advice about specific things. They would even call them to come and judge and rule on certain social issues, and they bring peace. They never went to school, but they were able to have an impact on the life of people who were around them, thanks to their knowledge. You probably know the history of many African elders who are actually social leaders who did not have any specific traditional responsibilities, but they were respected by their people because they were able, they were real models to everybody. And these are people who had real impact. And I feel that we as academics, I'm not saying intellectuals, you see the nuance there, I'm not sure we've been able to render justice to many of these people. And finally, we see day-to-day people who struggle and make significant change. Is change only made through the discourse or knowledge that you produce, or that change can be made through your daily action? Look at the child who cleans the street in Yaoundé in Paris. Look at the, I mean, you know this, look at these elementary school teachers who were working for missionary schools for, in fact, almost nothing. Look at the huge impact that they had in people's lives. So that's it with the intellectual. Now, talking about the transformation, I would seek your input from that. It's interesting that you talk about the ability of knowledge and intellectuals to impact and transform society. And then you relate it to cinema. I'm actually very happy that you bring that, because it seems to me that this is, don't take this as a provocation, but it seems to me that it's like a 360-degree transformation, and a wonderful way, in my view, to reconcile with a predecessor whom you've spent a big time challenging. Who is that? Semen's man. That 30 years or 40 years later, you are back to examining the possibility for cinema to upload, to uplift and bring social change. That's precisely why, that was precisely the aim and the goal that cinema and his evening school were seeking in the 1970s, 80s, which, of course, is a concept and praxis of cinema that has its own limit. So that today in 2023, you seem to be reconciling and engaging with Semen's man, although don't quote him, I'm not even sure that they thought about him, but I find it fascinating. But then my question to you would be, while we talk about film as a means for social transformation, if that's actually the case, are we not giving too much power to movies, to culture? We can agree on one thing. Cinema and intellectuals can actually foresee, because they are power representation. Cinema can predict. As a matter, you were telling us today that somebody were asking you, how did you know that in 2025 we will be in the dark? Because Cameroon is in dark totally. So while cinema is able to foresee, to predict, is it actually able to bring that change? If it does, how does the change happen? And finally, how is change brought institutionally and socially? What is our responsibility as artists, as academics, potentially as intellectuals? Because we tend to conflate both. Many academics who've had some half-baked degrees, things that are intellectuals, because they go and make noise on TV. You know, Cameroon is a perfect example of that. Yet they are unable to produce anything which is sensible. So how do we go about that? But to end, while I get your question, I would really love to get your feedback about this coming together, this circle. You are back to Semben and to Algiers charters. Cinema is going to transform Africa. Well, how do we do about that? Thank you.
Okay, many challenging points. Thank you. I think the end is actually more interesting for me, because you mentioned everything but the topic, therapeutic intellectual.
Yeah.
That's what you forget. Semben, even if he thought about cinema being a kind of element of transformation, what I see that is different is the concept of the therapeutic intellectual. Yeah. And if I have to kind of define it a little bit here, I took Fanon when I was presenting as an example. I think the idea that the doctor, when you go to a doctor might not even talk to you. He will examine you, and he'll start writing his thing, and then he goes do this. So he doesn't really care about what you have to say. He doesn't want to lecture you. He doesn't think he will get you to your head. you know, like all these instructor. I like, even in terms, when there's this difference between instruction, you know, where they fire you with knowledge. That's coming from the church, you know. The idea on Sunday that the priest will make good believers, you know, by telling you all these things and thinking that all these words will end up affecting you, it will impact you, and it will change the society. I remember this American guy who was doing an NGO in Cameroon. He was telling me that the difference between our NGO and the usual NGO of the French is that they lecture villagers. He said, when we think they're tired, they don't want to work, we put vitamins in their food so that they have a lot of energy and they start working. So it was not about lecturing, hoping that I'll get them through the brain and then I'll trigger some action and transformation. So to say that the concept itself of therapeutic, it's considering the society like he was sick. And be also a person who would decide to care about the society. That's kind of an element there. And actually, you can even talk about cinema of care, or you could call it healing cinema, but the idea that if the relation changes and is not anymore about, you talk very well about your grandmother, your mother, the caring relation, where it's not about lecturing you, even if there's education for sure, the information you need to get, but the idea of now embracing this society with all the handicap we know, with all the problem we know, and decide that how am I going to like operate as a doctor just to fix, you know, the patient. Okay. Now, Fela, I love Fela too. Actually, I have a piece, but I couldn't show it. It's too long on Fela here. He is actually a perfect example. But Fela was a prophetic intellectual. That's what Udimbe defines very well. He sees exactly what's wrong, what's right before everybody else, yeah. What needs to happen. But now look at what he did. He created a state, Kalashkuta. He became a polygamist, married all his dancers. Obviously, it's not that I encourage that, but I think he tried to find a model, economic model for his enterprise, you know, because he was banned and he had all these dancers, and you could see how he was struggling between this whole idea of managing this whole thing, the African culture is trying to put in front, and coming up with a kind of economic model. For me, that's what I think. But definitely, he was a prophetic intellectual, you know. Now, when you, all the other one you mentioned, Mongo Biti, Chinua Achebe, Uyua Chongo, for me, they are the instructor, you know, they are the other model, you know. Yes, they would be maybe like Sartre or somebody, but it's clearly that they're resisting the political system, they're challenging it, but very clearly, many people on the ground don't even know them. That's really what's also a fact. We always talk about this in Cameroon, like all the writing of Achille Mbembe, nobody knows about it in Cameroon. And we wonder if you consider your country or your continent or your people in trouble, and you decide to write or to devote your life to fix the problem by writing, you know, and it doesn't reach them, or even the writing itself, I don't know how materially he can do it. Maybe he has no way to do it himself, but the idea that that knowledge you've been producing doesn't transform the society. You should be wondering at some point why you're doing what you're doing, unless it's not your agenda. You decide, okay, I don't care, I'll just write my things. But I imagine that if there's a big crisis in a country and everybody is threatened to die or whatever, everybody should be mobilized to kind of make sure this whatever the drama or crisis doesn't happen.
Yeah. But Jean-Pierre, yes, I mean, just to pick on what you're saying, it's interesting that you are conceding and actually praising Fela. There's no question about it. But in the same time, you are not putting down people like Mongo Biti. I mean, because basically both of them are prophetic, except that they have different talents. Mongo Biti, Ngugi, Achebe, and Valsero, and you, and whoever, they have that specific talent. They are not engineers. They are not doctors. They are not journalists. My perception is these people perform what they do at their best, at their own risk. Whether it transforms the society, whether it's able to transform society or not, it's a different question. Yeah. So, if we look at
put down
well, I mean, clear. Sorry about that. But if we only look at the operational ability of what they do, then we will. In fact, that opens up a much bigger problem because, as you know, these people write in French, which is read by a very small minority. But studies show that novels published in Chiluba, in Kasai, are read by a few million people, more than anyone published in French. You know, and in the case of Achille Mbembe, for example, well, he writes what is right. It has to be accessible, and second, when it's even accessible, you need to understand what he's saying. But,
there's a piece maybe I missed because I was very fast. The 1956 Congrès Bandung. It's no, the one in Paris.
In Paris, okay.
It's very interesting that it happens in Paris. Obviously, they all, and with Senghor being also, because I think he's the one who opened the conference or something, or closed it, but it set up what you just mentioned. It set up the fact that the intellectual almost connection, you know, is a French-Paris connection first. When you talk about books, about publishing, about no accessibility, it's because that's what was set up. That's why it's a model that is in question here. So, obviously, if the idea of having an impact, you know, obviously is the agenda, because some might not even have that project. But the idea here is that the whole setup, I don't even know, you mentioned the French language, but I'm just saying that being an intellectual, you know, clearly, you know, became actually having that connection, you know, with France, you know, and with the system in France. That's what will make you intellectual. There are many others. I have the example of Lionel Manga I just met. He's been doing this for 30 years in Cameroon.
Exactly. Nobody knows him.
Yeah, but he just went to Paris to publish his first book in Paris, obviously, but he has been resisting this for like 30 years, you know, and you can see all of a sudden he's known, but we've known him all these years, but obviously he was with people, he was having all these discussions, he was, you know, on the ground, but Paris is what makes you a kind of intellectual in that sense.
Well, again, that's very true, but my opinion is, I think we can only blame ourselves if we continue to make Paris the place where we need to publish, the place where we need to be. It's unfortunate, but I think the French are not responsible for our making them and their country and their culture the place where we can legitimate ourselves.
This is not where the discussion is going. No.
If I may finish.
No, I'm just saying, I just want to make point. This is not the question. I started the whole thing about Africa being an invention, you know. So we are in the mimicking kind of culture. You know, when you want to be a filmmaker, you will have to mimic those who have been filmmakers before you, who most of the time will be Western filmmakers. Maybe you look like now we have more from different countries. But the whole culture being an invention, as Mudimbe says, you know, obviously we at best become that culture, you know, or we are at least following that culture. So I'm just saying it's a kind of identity now. And when we talk about the mask at the beginning, you know, the first film, it was the idea, and that's what Pierre Feuzeau is saying, is that an African mask that was taken, you know, that was a ritual object. A Western discourse was put on it. You know, when it comes back, it's a Western object. So that's what he says very clearly. So we shouldn't also deny that, you know, because that's a kind of given. Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, well, I agree with you of lots of the things. But maybe one other thing that we could discuss or even explore is how, I mean, if we can go beyond this, should I say victimization? But let's just take one or two examples. If you can put Paris or Berlin or Beirut or Britain, I mean, in the 60s or 50s and even until the 80s, we're talking about books, you had all Paris-based publisher. In the English system was Heinemann, London, Nairobi, and what have you. But we also have some intellectuals and writers who are local born, who did everything on the continent, and they've been actually successful. And yet, and then to your point, when the others realized that they are so successful, then they picked up on that. The first and prime example being Nkrumah. When he published Les Soleils des Indépendances, it was deemed that, oh, this is too ugly to be published, this is not French. But when it was so successful, the French picked it up and actually, quote unquote, forgot to mention that it was previously published in Montreal. We can also take Moussa Konaté, who was publishing in Bamako, all his detective novels. Eventually, all his novels were taken by French publishers just because they realized that it's successful. So it's really, in my view, open us to create this system, a network that allows us to be more productive and also to institutionalize and canonize our own. You are probably familiar with, there was this old man who was called Professor Obama Jean-Baptiste. This man was so knowledgeable, but everybody ignored him. You probably remember Atebayene, who wrote Mémoire d'un colonisé. This guy was an important figure of the UPC. He had such memories, but nobody knew about him. But that said, what do we do in the face of this?
Okay, I would say that most of we have, again, society transform. Obviously, I don't have expectation from that society the way it is right now. So, and again...
very pessimistic, Jean-Pierre.
I don't know, but I think I am a, how do you call it? I don't want to say therapeutic intellectual, but I am more a radiologist. I would say when you look at what's going on, you kind of see very clearly that the model, when I mentioned that Frantz Fanon is the first one, he gave up on his French nationality. He gave up and went to Algeria. He was a doctor. He resigned from the hospital and decided to go to war. No, which he did, when you read his presentation at this Congrès, you could see that he was getting there, really. Yeah. And he was, the other one were Africans. He's a Martiniquais, so he was kind of French. But he decided that, so he did a reverse process as the African process in looking at what would happen, and it's very clear that you can see that the whole concept of change or transformation became like not a theater, but just a kind of performance.
Yes,
people would perform being for change.
Yes, Jean-Pierre. Then I have a question for you, but don't feel compelled to answer.
I will try.
But are you trying to say that beyond and after Fanon, there is little or no therapeutic or transformative intellectual on the continent? If so, which one are they?
No, that's not what I'm saying.
No, I'm just trying to understand.
I'm saying that...
I'm just trying to prompt you.
I think he was in that generation, let's say on that generation, at that time, because the whole idea of being intellectual was so related to the colonial master. It was because it was a copy of that behavior. You mentioned very well the possibilities of having on the continent traditional savvy people who transformed the society and who were able to kind of make a change at many, many levels, which is true. But I'm talking about this model because it's the model that actually was and is still being replicated. I always say that even if in Cameroon law, traditional law is being kind of acknowledged, you don't see anybody saying that I'm a traditional lawyer. Everybody would say, no, I'm a lawyer, graduate from, I don't know, university. So you can see very well, the same with the medicine. Because medicine is very important. Everybody in Cameroon, from the bottom Cameroonian, like with no money, with nothing, to the president, everybody go to a witch doctor, to a traditional healer. Yeah. Everybody. But, and COVID proved that actually because, Cameroonian, most of the time, I don't know for other countries, they just follow whatever the system. So when they saw that the white man is dying, they said, damn, so you cannot follow them anymore. Let's go back to our tradition, look for solutions. Because it was the fact that people were dying in Europe. Because it was not that they went to their traditions because they wanted, but it was like, usually just follow. Just follow whatever they do there is good. But when they saw that people are dying in Europe, in America, that's where they start digging in their tradition. Well, what do we have here to do this? So you can see very well that despite this power of knowledge, this old knowledge, the traditional indigenous knowledge, people are not really giving it any value. So you don't have any traditional hospital. Most of the people, produce, you can go on the street, you can see poison mixed next to all these medicines, whatever. Nobody's actually like working on it. No, I'm exaggerating. But it's not really well organized by the system, the way the Western hospital is organized in Africa, in Cameroon. So you can see very well the value they give to traditions. But the trend clearly is to continue producing these intellectual, So I don't see, and the whole idea of integrating the whole therapeutic, and I like when you mention people coming from very far to seek advice from your grandmother and everybody. So I think it's a kind of therapeutic.
Of course, yeah.
And obviously, where is it happening? Where are people trained? I'm sure that the new generation is not doing it anymore. So I'm just saying that whatever valuable is there is not really modernized, integrated in a way now it could be embraced, unless it's validated by Paris.
By the West. Well, it probably looks like Paris is somewhere so central in what we all do. But I take it that you don't want to mention anybody post-Fanon, but you don't have to answer, as I said.
Sure there are people, I would, because it's just to see that that model was not really followed, maybe also, that we have this thing where when people die, we feel like they failed, Cameroon is a country where we had a war of liberation for independence, and we lost. So today, everybody's a traitor, because that's what pays.
But coming back to Fanon, I mean, even at 1956 conference, you mentioned Senghor, but what about Césaire? Because Césaire, he was also an intellectual, but rather extremely committed, in fact, closer to Fanon, we would say ideologically, than what would. So where would you put him? Because in fact, he combined both. Theory, fiction, also practice, because he was mayor until he died.
No, it's true. It's true that Césaire is not Senghor for sure. Yeah. And I think, as you said, I agree that he was closer to Fanon's model, because obviously he gave up on so many things, and he went back to kind of, at his level, be a kind of agent of transformation. Obviously, his writing is more radical than Senghor. But it's clear also that because he was French, it's very difficult for Africans to kind of relate to that, because when you start analyzing the failure of Africa, I don't like to generalize, but let's say some people feel that Cameroon is a failed state, So when you compare, obviously you cannot say the same with Martinique, because he didn't go for independence, because he knew also that it wouldn't work. So I think it's really interesting to see how he knew he didn't have much room, and he preferred to stay radical, but also knowing that he won't be able to do much. But he's a good model, I agree.
Well, coming back to the therapeutic and also the transformative intellectual, how do you assess the collaboration, to put it mildly, between academics, maybe not intellectuals, and political power in post-colonial states, for example?
For me, that's really where what it comes down to, actually, somehow, because the transformation is being either blocked or implemented by the political system somehow. So it's very difficult to be a kind of transformative agent without having to confront, the political state. But at least to conceive it, So because people don't have a model. I always say that when you know how much hope the Sankara, the Rawlings produce in African population, and even now the coup in Mali, they kind of produce hope, very few people have been able to produce. And I also wonder how little theory of revolution you have, practical one. So you tell people want to do revolution, this one you do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You don't have much. Like when you want to change, like the way they did, despite the success, at least popular success they had, you don't find it much. Because most of the intellectuals are good Christians or good Muslims, I guess.
So should I take from you that in order to be able to transform, you can only confront? Can you not only, in a way, collaborate and bring it transformation?
No, not only, but it's one option.
Yeah.
But I think I give back the model of the doctor.
Yeah.
The doctor is just committed to heal you, even without your consent. No, at least you have to be consent. Yeah. But I'm just saying, he's not about talking too much. He just active and come up with knowledge. Obviously, he studied to be able to make sure he reverse the process that is harming you.
Maybe maybe there are questions from the audience or from colleagues online, if they have any. I suspect there will be many.
Does it work? Yeah. Yeah, first of all, thank you very much. Because time is limited, I'm very sorry. So that we open up now for some questions. And maybe before we open up, maybe you can make like one statement, bringing it. Everything you have been discussing was a lot about the intellectuals and bringing it back to cinema again. I was missing a little bit the link, along the discussion. So can you make it a little bit more concrete then again?
Okay. So obviously,
and then we open
the second
up for
part
the
of the
discussion.
presentation I did, obviously, I had to go very fast because I felt that I was taking too much time. It's very clear that when I mentioned, for example, the physiology, in cinema, meaning that the heartbeat, all the emotions being produced, and all that is actually engaging your body, physiologically. You cry. So cinema, obviously, they say it's kind of immediate. It's almost taking the medium out. So you start living cinema like real life. That's when I was mentioning the gangster community around the cinemas. Is because actually it's not cinema anymore. Whatever values are there, are able to. So for me, that it's very clear. And when I also mentioned the rehabilitating hero, Batman, Superman, for children mainly, but for everybody, it's very clear that cinema is because of identification, has kind of elements that make sure that you get into the things. And I always like to mention Nazi movies. I remember I went to Berlin and then I tried to watch them, and they said, you cannot watch them. I'm like, who are you? I'm a filmmaker. You cannot. So you think, when I'll watch it, I'll kill everybody? What was going to happen? So it was very clear that people think cinema do things. They know, they know, I'm not sure even who they are, but I'm just saying, they think cinema do things. So when they stop somebody like me, not watching a movie, is it to protect the society against me after watching the film? So clearly, cinema is seen as something that kind of change people or make people do things. So that's one of the things. Hollywood use it for capitalistic purposes. That's why they want to make sure they test the movies. Even in the screenwriting process, when you in a movie you kind of identify he's the killer. It's actually because they told you, because they don't want you to feel frustrated that you're too stupid. But it's kind of structuring your brain in a way where you kind of get used to the known. And they say that the unknown is actually the worst movie in people's brain you can make. Meaning that the next generation who are used to those narrative structure, will not be able to deal with new problems. Because when it's different, obviously, when they don't know, they give up. That's where you become a bad filmmaker, because they don't know. So the unknown, the unexplored, is really completely out. So we kind of always dealing with what we know. And that's what is being recycled, and voila.
Thank you very much. So if there are questions here, maybe you can come here and ask the question, because then people in the Zoom can also hear your question.
So we didn't want to be Zoom.
YouTube channel.
Good evening, gentlemen. Thank you for the vital discussion that you guys have highlighted here. I wanted to first touch on the 1956 conference and talk about James Baldwin's reflection of that conference, because I think that reflection is often overlooked because he wasn't a member of the panels who were speaking, but his Americanism captured the sense of ambivalence that perhaps is more reflective to today on those questions that were being raised in that conference. And then post-Fanon, I would say there's definitely Steve Biko, the medical student who drops out and becomes radical and goes on to create his own clinic against the apartheid government, and manages to raise donors to fund the clinic. And I think that's something worth. And then the last point that I had here, and so my sense of the struggle is that if we might compare the struggle in Africa and Europe, I would say that the struggle in Africa sometimes it can be perceived as wanting to fit in, but I would say it's a struggle of presence, which is very different from the struggle of the European today, which is more a struggle for authenticity. And so when people are struggling to be present, of course, then they want to be integrated into a greater Nollywood, or the idea that in South Africa, when a big American pop star film star comes to play Nelson Mandela, that's when the movie is really happening. And so I want you guys to reflect on that.
Okay, très bien. Okay, I'll go for now. So I like very much the Steve Biko and the Black consciousness model, which is clearly a therapeutic intellectual. Sorry, I forgot him. Obviously, I haven't done my list, and maybe you're helping me now completing that list, definitely. Because obviously, he was at the same level as Fanon in terms of dealing with what is going on in our minds as Black people. I think I like the Fanon, Baldwin and Richard Wright conflict, because they would think it was a kind of tension. One was suspected to be CIA, the other one was supposed to be KGB. So anyway, what I liked about the whole thing is that it was kind of a time of all these things, you know. Despite all these differences, I think Richard Wright threatened to leave the conference at some point. But I think despite all these tensions, Africa became independent. You know, that was one of the goals. How? Was it really independence? Still. But still, I think it was the energy they put together to say, okay, we will get together and really at least call for a change 4 years later. And 1 year later was Ghana, and then 2 years later it was other African countries. So I think somehow, despite all this, you know, now when you mention the presence, actually it's true that, and I touch it in some way by talking about the red carpet, you know, being a real culture, the marketing, which also is somehow a big distraction. Again, it's a kind of a struggle and between the wannabes, because we kind of coming from a colonial kind of mind, and those who really are interested in doing something with the community. And I think the same medium, you know, is actually for those two things. I always say every text is not literature, you know, every image is not cinema. So now, depending on how you define cinema, obviously, but I don't think we are doing the same profession. We're in the same profession. You know, those who go for red carpets, I don't think we have much to talk about, you know.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Thank you very much for your extensive discourse. I have a few questions. So firstly, when you mentioned about Fela and his works, it really caught my interest because I've been seeing a lot of things about him. I'm Nigerian originally, and I've been to Fela's shrine and all of that. And my question is, where do you think the meeting point can be for the cinema and the academia? Because one presentation I made last semester was on Nollywood as a change ambassador, a positive change ambassador. Because I've been in the Nollywood space for quite some time before coming here, and I've seen the challenges that we've gone through as a film industry, because the government does not support the industry basically, and you know how the industry started from market people, basically traders who decided to come together to start an industry, and it has grown to be the third largest in the world currently. And just a few days ago, there's been like a massive revolution on one of the films that was released on Netflix. It was released and the viewership was really great, but it mirrored the society exactly how it's happening currently in Lagos and the political space. And the posters of the billboards was torn from Third Mainland Bridge by the government. So it was a whole revolutionary thing. And I think that Nollywood is doing, or I'd say I'm concentrating on Nollywood because that's what I'm really familiar with. It's showing that change is possible because people are seeing it and saying, oh yes, they tore it down because it's a reflection of what they are doing. The film just portrayed exactly what's happening in government. So my question now is, where do you think that the academia and the cinema can have a point of convergence that can cause a revolutionary change?
So he wrote from screen, from you wrote a book, about from text to screen, or?
Yes. I thought he was asking you the question. Well, thanks very much. It's very interesting because, the thing about politicians is that while they tend to have to threaten and to demolish and to downplay artists, they're at the same time so afraid of them, One interesting example is AY, they censor movies. And I remember that when Ngugi published one of his novels, I think it was either The River Between, I don't know which one it was, the book was censored, and they bought all copies of that book because they thought that is actually, the perception is that it's actually reflecting reality. So they bought all the copies of this book. And the same thing happened with people like Mongo Bechi. Of course, you know that the best way to advertise something is to try to censor it. So back to your question, where does academia and cinema can meet and create a hopefully revolution? I think that two things. On the side of academia, we know that academics produce knowledge. They produce and share knowledge. And that is why education is actually the most, also the church, but we can talk about that. But academics can really transform society in a very positive way. That's why, in my view, if in a society there is hate, there is war, there is lack of respect, it means that in many respects, school and education has failed. Because if you are not taught at school by academics about how to respect a woman, how to respect your brother, how to respect somebody who is different from you, it means that there's something totally wrong. In a specific case of Nigeria, the Hollywood phenomenon is very interesting in that precisely it showed that in spite of the neglect, people, artists, and ordinary people can actually take off their life into their hands and build an entire industry out of it to the point of being perceived as a threat. And you know the history of Nollywood pretty well. Thanks to Nollywood, there's an entire industry. There's Department of Theatre and Drama that exploded in many Nigerian universities. So this is, in my view, something that was unexpected, but which the society is building upon to hopefully apply a systematic change. It is even more interesting that thanks to Nollywood, people now realize that something can come out of Africa and really hit the world, you know, because Netflix is not a humanitarian company. It's not an NGO. So they can only put their money where they know there is going to be a return. It's not like a remote return. It has to be immediate return. So if we have been able to hit that, and in fact, I'm actually also very pleased that for the past 5 or 10 years, now when you fly on planes, you have option, you can watch some African movies, which was not the case like 15 years ago. So, I mean, in academics, what academics do, I would say even more cinema industry as an industry than academics, it blends all this together and puts Africa in a web that was not seen before. And that is why I was say thank you, Nigeria, thank you, Nollywood, thank you, cinema from Ghana, also Ethiopia, which is actually a huge thing, you know. So to put it in summary, entertainment does not only entertain, but it can also be transformative, also be in many ways therapeutic, mirror that society, show the wounds which only in ways that only artists can do. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, Netflix is capitalism, you know. So Nollywood is capitalism. So I don't know what is so exciting about it, maybe except the fact that people can feed their families, you know, with the kind of a sector that was not really taken into account, you know, where people were struggling. You mentioned a film on Netflix. So films on Netflix, they don't have an author, you don't remember the director. So what happened when you put your film on Netflix, it's Netflix film. It's not anymore Jean-Pierre Bekolo's film. It's a Netflix film. So you don't see the change? So it means that any film on Netflix, you don't care, it's Netflix. You know? So they managed to erase the authors, those who actually have a specific voice. You know, it becomes a Netflix film. You know, and how can Netflix create a revolution? You know, which when you look at, you know exactly, obviously, as you said very well, it's about money. Okay. Maybe, I don't know if you know their business model. They come to Nigeria, they put $10 million in a Nigerian film or series. They expect to have, I don't know, 10 million Nigerian subscription for 1 month, paying $10. So every month they're making 10 or 100 million. They'll do it once, you know. But then every year for the next, I don't know how many years, they'll get monthly their 10 or 100 millions. That's what they do. Obviously, Netflix doesn't have a production unit where they actually think about what's being written. They kind of work with some producers, but very clearly, you know, I don't think, and that's maybe me, that this structure are there for a narrative healing or whatever we talk about here. It's about money. I was in Colombia when they released Narcos. Obviously, everybody was calling me that you're in danger, you're in Colombia, I see Narcos, and then it's like dangerous for you. I'm like, where? I mean, I was going to Quibdó, to Choco in the bus and everything. I don't remember even encountering any drug dealer. Just to say that, obviously, content is important. It's not just about industry, because, again, you know, yes, you know, giving jobs is always important, you know, but I'm just saying it's also about what are we saying. I like Fela a lot. I think Fela made 20 songs, I don't know. But each one of his 20 songs changed something or was talk about something nobody talked about before. You know, even the UN never say that African country were corrupted. He's the one who said it first. He was put in jail, you know. Actually, I believe they killed him. But still, just to say that content is important. I don't even like that word content because it takes out the meaning behind what you do, you know. So the name disappears, the topic disappears, kind of it becomes just like content, you know. And at the end of the day, you have the industry. Yeah, money. So obviously, if it's at that price that we will have an industry for me, obviously, I can't buy into it. You know, I like when you say, you know, these filmmakers, Sadiq Balewa, Ola Balogun, you knew what they were about in their mind, like Fela. But now it's Netflix, even Nollywood. But people say it's a Nollywood film. I'm like, nobody talk about, this specific film, this happened. One book can change your life. Like one film can change your life. But I don't see this film, they talk about them in plural. Nollywood films, you know? So it's just like, the presence, you know, somebody was saying about presence, but in the other way, it's just something that is there in space, you know? Anyway, obviously, now to answer your question, I think somehow it's really, I think one film, and maybe this one was the one who created revolution, but it has no author. It's a Netflix film, you know? And I don't think Netflix is about revolution, because if that revolution goes very far, Nigerian government will stop Netflix, Netflix will change the story, because at the end it's about money. So it won't be any Fanon fighting. The Netflix will never have that, you know, kind of attitude. That's just what I can say.
There's online. There's one question. It's already very late. It's quarter to 10. So maybe I can read the question from online, and then you had a question before.
Online also.
Yeah, this is what but they didn't write it here. Then they have to wait if they don't use the official way. Okay, let me read this one. Saibo Bayo asks, I would like to hear a bit more about the philosophical ground of cinema, especially the way Bekolo brings ancestral cosmological framework into play, giving the example of Les Saignantes. Is there another? Let's then take 2 or 3 together and see how we can maybe mix a bit also the answers. Otherwise, the questions and the answers were very long.
Yeah,
it's good. It's not a critique. But we don't be limited in time. I'm sorry.
From Thierry Boujeke, he would like to know how much trauma studies help you, Jean-Pierre, in this search for your definition of the therapeutic and healing. And from Gilbert, he said, you have done interesting work on the African diaspora in Colombia, for instance, and I was hoping you would share some in the opening fragment you started with in relation to therapeutic dimension of cinema. In your diasporic project, I guess you encountered different types of knowledge producer that made you rethink African stories, African philosophy, or African personality, or even African's future. Does your recent cinematic work with the diaspora have a therapeutic function for you and perhaps for those with whom you have collaborated in your recent projects? Gilbert.
Thank you. So actually I'll start with that one because actually unfortunately I have the clip but I skipped it, sorry. But the idea of going to Colombia, obviously I call the film Nous les Noirs. Nous les Noirs, when you think about Jean Rouge, moi un noir. So the idea of going to Colombia, 10,000 kilometers away from Cameroon, and meeting people there where actually you kind of connect in a very basic way in the town and then in the bush, but it looks like you're in Cameroon. But what was really interesting is I didn't go to make a film, but I decided to make a film. And obviously, just this decision of making a movie is what kind of object would it be? So there's one thing I create in the film was what they call the missing archives. I was told about stories about like Cimarrons, like local heroes, and I had to produce some clip of them that didn't exist, obviously. It was just a story they told me. So one element was to create this missing archive. And then the other thing was also, as I said, to define what we do. I cannot be an ethnologist because I'm African, like they kind of are. So how do I go there? What do I show? What do I not show? So this whole selection process, I remember I tried to get money for post-production for this film. And they said, no, we don't understand your documentary because it's not very clear. I said, it will never be clear because it's clear that I will never tell the story to a Western audience. Because what happened when they will watch the film themselves in Colombia? I won't talk about them like these people, you know? So obviously, I'm part of these people. So I will make a way where I cannot put the story like I was a foreigner. And then, again, I want to show it to Cameroon. People know that there are people in the diaspora that kind of you have a connection with. So obviously the whole structure of the object, the documentary object, has to be original and different. So it's very clear that it's still a quest because it's not perfect, but you think this is an attempt to produce something under that condition. To talk about the first question, naked reality, the Muvungu, traditional ancestral stuff. Obviously, in my film Les Seignantes, I use a kind of women's secret society concept called Muvungu. I didn't know much about Muvungu when I made the film. I read it in books because I read that if you are a man, you watch a ritual, you are killed if you're seen by a woman anyway. So obviously it was very risky. I couldn't even find people practicing it. But later on, I kind of met a woman who was kind of initiated, and I interviewed her. I also had it here, but it's too long to show. I interviewed her, and then because she was a kind of hermaphrodite who was thrown in the bush, and she survived because she was picked up by a old woman and then raised her in the bush. But now she's kind of normal, and she was initiated to that ritual, and that's kind of, she did a reconstitution of the ritual. But to be very specific, in my other film, Naked Reality, I couldn't show, it's a science fiction, but it's the whole idea that what if in the future we'll have this disease, bad luck will be a disease. Like you have a fever, I had bad luck. So because they know how to fix it, bad luck, just do this one. So this, because we don't see the future with these elements. We just see the future with technology, whatever. But, maybe because today when you have bad luck, they say, go to the village, go wash yourself with, water like this, with these plants. But we don't know the process really clearly. But if in the future, bad luck becomes just like something we know, you just have to say hello to an ancestor, then you feel like, bad luck is gone, So I'm just saying, I speculate with these things that are African traditions, but in the future and putting it in a kind of science fiction process. That was a cyber question. And the trauma, no, I haven't studied anything about trauma. When you're in Cameroon, you are in permanent trauma.
Well, it's a joke. It's actually a joke on WhatsApp, and I saw it on WhatsApp. Somebody was saying that when he dies, if he goes to hell, we just tell God, no, I'm from Cameroon. So I don't need to go there anymore.
I think there was one, maybe we can take one last question.
Okay, let me come and use the mic. Thank you very much for the presentation. Now I'll pick it from the last point, trauma and everything, but it's not about trauma. Considering the fact that most African countries still suffer from post-colonial anxieties and effects, and the current precarious state of most African countries, how does cinema become therapeutic in Africa? Since we've been talking about therapeutic intellectualism, so how does cinema help Africa, where an average person does not even have a television, and a lot of things are still in place? So how does cinema become a therapeutic tool for Africa? Then number two, we talk about different types of intellectualism. We looked at Fela. As much as we look at Fela as a prophetic, there are some school of thought that will look at the music of Fela and Anikulapo Kuti and say it's therapeutic. However, the question now is, does therapeutic intellectualism, we talk about transformation, intellectualism, prophetic, and everything, does it take precedence from all this form of intellectualism? And if yes, how does it? Thank you very much.
Okay. You want me to pick?
Okay.
Well, I don't think all forms of intellectualism, in my view, are very complementary. I don't think they exclude each other because we have to first give credit to all these intellectuals who invest their energy in producing these thoughts, values, and also very much action into what they want to do. Remember I said that intellectuals, actors, I mean, they have different talents. So they perform to the best of their abilities depending on where they want to go, depending on where and how they see the society. So, I mean, the short answer is no, they are not mutually exclusive. They exist next to each other. No.
When you ask how cinema can be therapeutic, I mean, I looked at more how it could be a disease, for sure, but how you could actually harm us. I mean, at least what cinema does to us. The whole problem for me is just mimicking cinema done by people here and there instead of trying to produce cinema just from an intention that is very clear. Let's say, I always say that cinema was invented in Africa. You know, what is cinema? They say cinema is telling stories with pictures and sound. So I don't know if you had experienced somebody telling you a story where nothing happened back home, but nothing happened, he just left his house, came here, but the way he's telling you the story, obviously, I don't want to say it's therapeutic, but it could be kind of an experience where you see that his talent of delivering a story kind of affects you in a certain way. So I'm just saying, the idea of being able to tell a story without even looking at the story itself, just the ability to tell a story in a certain way, obviously has a kind of impact, you know, a feel-good impact, whatever it could be. But I'm just saying, cinema is not something that is alien from Africa. So we shouldn't separate sometimes, you know, because of technology, camera, we start thinking that it's not something, you know, that is in African culture.
Well, basically, I mean, basically saying cinema is narration, the ability to tell a story. Yeah.
With pictures,
well, yes, with or without pictures. So.
It's not cinema anymore.
I think we have to come to an end. I'm very sorry. But let me thank you very much, and maybe thank you very much for giving this great start of our semester term here. We had a good discussion tonight that we can continue. I recommend everybody to read the text written by Professor Tcheuyap and also see all the films, watch all the films of Jean-Pierre Bekolo. Maybe you want to mention the new site?
Link, jeanpierrebekolo.com.
Yes, okay.
Today they will ask you to pay, but send your email first and then we'll see what happens.
Okay, so please, I invite you also to thank our two discussants for tonight. And in the name of the cluster, thanks for coming and thanks for sharing your ideas and the discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.